So let's start. Thanks for coming out to this session. I'm Erik Schön. We'll be spending the next couple of minutes talking about mapping strategy, leadership, and development capabilities, starting with situational awareness or orientation, and using value change, which is WardleyMaps without the evolution axis, to assess our own strategy, leadership, and software development capabilities, and potentially also our competitors' capabilities. And this is something you do even before starting to strategize, coming up with all these gameplays and things. So this is part of doctrine, which is really those timeless, eternal, context-independent principles that are super important to get right before you start strategizing. Yes, advice for success in turbulent times. See what we have here. Yeah, this old gentleman, Sun Tzu from 500 BC. Assessments are important, you know, looking at your conditions and comparisons. This will show you who will succeed and who will fail. John Boyd, orientation, the most important part of the ODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. This, you know, gives us this is the foundation for decisions, for actions, and really to get this situational awareness that Simon Wardley also talks about. You know, this importance of singing from the same song sheet or hymn sheet, and being on the same page and seeing the same world. That's really the foundation of it all. So yeah, that's the starting point for the session. And by all means, please jump in with questions or with comments, either in the chat or you know, open up a window and talk out. It's much more fun if we have a conversation than me just being a talking head. Then you could just watch this on the YouTube channel at a later time. So, do you have a question already now?
No, not yet.
Just okay, cool. Cool. So, yeah, a little bit of a commercial break. I will keep this very brief, just to give you a little background of who I am. I'm Erik Schön, live in Stockholm. I wrote a couple of books, things I've been thinking about and practicing over 20 plus years. And during the pandemic, I got some time to reflect and write things down because I didn't have to commute. So the Art of Leadership is from this year, and the Art of Strategy, which is all about WardleyMapping, visualizing strategy based on the eternal wisdom of Sun Tzu, John Boyd, and Simon Wardley. I mean, great practitioners of strategy and also great theorists of strategy. And I try to put that in a format, a short format, easily digestible. So that's a bit about me. I head up something called Erlang Solutions. We're doing open source development in Erlang Elixir. It's an open source programming language system on a virtual machine called the Beam, and we work with companies like Ericsson, Cisco, Klarna, MasterCard, WhatsApp, and a few others. So that's pretty cool, but that's not really the topic for today. The topic for today is how to succeed in turbulent times, based on some wisdom on leadership, strategy, and even development. So let's visualize strategy, leadership, and development in order to assess these capabilities, in order to improve our situational awareness, and see how we can also improve these capabilities. And by the way, all this is based on you know, experiences and things I've tried and tested in small and large companies that I mentioned on the previous slides that I've worked in over the years. Yes, visualizing capabilities. This is the Wardley doctrine table. It's an amazing collection of universally useful patterns that you can apply irrespective of context, irrespective of landscape, irrespective of climatic patterns. And this is really, you know, a gold mine that Simon has collected over the years. So this is one way of visualizing your capabilities, and you have all. I won't go through them in details. You can easily look them up in the work of Simon and on Medium and in my book, which is also available on Medium, totally free. You know, open source kind of material, and you can even structure this in steps or phases. I mean, you do this in the right order. But the important thing here is really that, you know, you need to get your doctrine, you need to get those principles right in the right order, phase 1, 2, and 3, and 4, before you even start considering gameplays and strategic choices and so on and so forth. Yeah, hello Holger, hello Philip, good to see you. Thanks for joining the session. And as I said before, please jump in with questions or comments either in the chat or you know, open up your mic and speak out. It's more fun if we have a conversation. So yes, I move on. Visualizing capabilities. Of course, you can use this wonderful tool called WardleyMapping, but let's start lots simple with the value chain, which, as Simon showed in his keynote, is just a simple dependency graph where you list the needs starting from your user or your stakeholder, and you know, you connect the capabilities that are needed to fulfill those needs. Or you can talk about components in the map or in the value chain that fulfill the needs of other components in such a value chain or Wardley map. And the value chain is quite simply a Wardley map without the evolution axis. And here's the canonical example. Well, not the T example, but the online photo example where you start with a consumer and you go all the way down to power. And here we have not added the evolution axis. And this is an experience I have from working with Wardley maps over many years, that it's good to start with those dependency graphs just to get people going. You stand on a whiteboard, you start drawing, and you don't need to talk about so much if it's a value chain or a Wardley map. You just start to draw with one or more people at the whiteboard, and that's a very good place to start with your Wardley mapping efforts. I mean, introduce the evolution axis at the later stage. Then we have maturity mapping, and you can hear all the details in Chris McDermott's talk later on today. This is something where you map things in context. You map capabilities or practices in a specific context, and you can use this for an individual or for a team or for an organization. And it's totally based on Wardley mapping, but it's focusing on capabilities or practices that you need in order to fulfill something that a user has. So this is a simple example from Chris and Mark Bergauer's work on the maturity mapping, where you start from a specific need, in this case wanting to find a home, and building an online platform for searching for and providing apartments and houses. And then in order to build that in context, the team looks at their knowledge and experiences and map that out in a Wardley map or in a maturity map, where you look at the evolution axes from all the way from novel to good practices and best practices. So we talk about practices here. Was that a question or a comment? Okay, so different ways of visualizing capabilities on an individual level, or on a team level, or on an organizational level. Hi, Chris. Good to see you here. Yeah, I think your handwriting is fantastic. It's really cool. Yeah, let's move on, and you will hear all the details later from Chris. So let's talk a little bit about strategy capabilities. Trying to extract the essence from the patterns from these fantastic strategy practitioners, strategy theorists, Sun Tzu, John Boyd, and Simon Wardley. And the simple idea is to be able to visualize this in order to have a conversation with people, to understand what we're pretty good at and what we need to improve in our team or in an organization. So that's sort of the framing. So let's look at the stakeholders. We have a number of them, all the way from teams and individuals, all the way to customers, of course, and competitors, and yeah, they will have needs, and in this case, the need is to succeed sustainably in turbulent times. We are in turbulent times. We're in interesting times for sure. And what capabilities are needed then, if we focus on strategy here? What are the strategic capability that an organization or a team, a leadership team or a management team would need, for instance, to succeed in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment? Well, let's start from the bottom. Boyd talks about observation. You need to gather data from people and or sensors. That's the starting point. But then, of course, you also need to orientate yourself to get this situational awareness, so that everyone sees the same picture, by doing regular assessments of key things. And this is from Sun Tzu. He talks about you need to check your purpose. You need to look at your doctrine. I mean, your principles of operation. You need to look at how your leadership is doing, and your capabilities in general. How you organize yourselves. What your ways of working. And then, of course, Simon talks about the climatic patterns. We heard that in the keynote. We need to look at our landscape, the evolution of technology and business. And this is important that you do regularly. And what does regular means? Well, it depends on if you're the CEO of a big corporation, maybe you do it every quarter. And if you're closer to reality, maybe you do it more often. But it is really important, and it's sort of a fractal thing that you do these assessments and updating your situational awareness regularly. Well, purpose, super important. Simon talks about it. John Boyd talks about it. Sun Tzu talks about it. It's so important to know your why and your what, and your bigger purpose or your vision, where things are going. And this should, of course, be based on a common situational awareness and the needs of your stakeholders. So then you co-create this, and that makes it so much more easy to make it happen. So next step would be to decide. And in this case, it's about making choices. We do this and we won't do that. Strategy is essentially about making choices. This is where we focus. These are our customers that we want to focus on. This is the playing field we want to play on. And then, choosing and or creating the conditions to get a good momentum or an advantageous momentum to fulfill your stated purpose. Or you can call that a mission, or you can call it a vision. I mean, different words for roughly the same thing. And of course, this involves gameplays, or sometimes called stratagems. I mean, Simon had this ILC invest, leverage, commoditize in the keynote. And that's one example of a gameplay. And this is what we commonly call strategy development, the way of creating your strategy. And of course, that's related to making your strategy happen. And there, the alignment is super important. How do you harmonize the understanding of purpose, potentially in the whole organization, which could be 100,000 people or more? How do you align people's understanding or harmonize their understanding of purpose and those choices and decisions for realizing it, for example, the gameplays? Then, based on trust, thanks Holger for the comment, trust is essential in order to grant autonomy for people to make this happen, take the actions, make the decisions in line with purpose and within some boundaries, but not too many, because then you're back in the straitjacket, the classic command and control, where we don't want to be. So this is all about trusting people, doing the right thing based on a harmonized understanding of purpose. And this is sort of what we mean by strategy deployment. And this will give us this momentum, which is sort of a generalized, abstract version of momentum from physics, a direction and some force or some power. But here we talk also about, things like equipment, logistics, timing, psychology. It's like a multidimensional chess field of potential movements and actual movements, and which of course we can influence through being fast, through surprise, positive surprise. We can, be unpredictable with using variety, and of course with focus and flexibility, because things may change. This will give us sustainable success in turbulent times. And before I open up for questions, I just want to emphasize that this can be realized in many ways. Somehow we need these capabilities, but different organizations may choose to do this in very different ways. And for each and every one of these boxes, you can do it in different ways, and there are different hows, so to speak, for each and every one. I mean, how you observe, that depends on your specific context. So each and every one of the boxes will be sort of realized in a context and made to happen in a different context. But I think I've found over the years this is a very good starting point for a conversation about what strategy is and what we're good at and what we're already doing, and what we could be better at, and where we might not even be doing it at all. And of course, you can put an evolution axis here and put things into, we're sort of best practice, or we think we're really good at this, or we're already doing this, or this is something we can learn from other companies or from other parts of our organization. So you can use these four steps on the evolution axis in order to sort of self-assess your leadership team or your part of the organization. Yes, someone maybe has something to say or question or reflect. No? I'm going to check the chat if there's something there. No, nothing in the chat. So either this is super simple or crystal clear or yeah, totally unclear. Let's see. I move on. This is the strategy part. Let's see what we have next. Yeah, what about leadership? Also important part of doctrine. And I try to look at patterns, the successful leadership patterns in turbulent times. And I've listed a number of things. I won't go through this in detail, but I want to highlight that there are a number of fantastic people recently, from Mary Parker Follett 100 years ago to Nora Bateson, Kim Scott, Dana Zohar, And it's very much resonates with things that Lao Tzu talked about already 500 years ago, at the same time as Sun Tzu, when it comes to leadership. And it's a lot about individual stepping in, leading more as a kind of a service, leadership as a service than specific roles. And we see a number of companies working this way in different kinds of businesses. Birdsong is in health, Patagonia is in clothing, Trifork, a Danish-Swiss IT consultancy, Hire, manufacturing services, white goods, Spotify, digital music, Scania, Toyota, automotive, GE Appliances also in white goods. So what I'm going to show you now is sort of based on this. And again, we're going to look at a value chain here, where we start with stakeholders being societies, communities, families, and individuals. And again, we would like to see sustainable success in turbulent times. And here, its starting point is being heart mindful, accessing both thoughts and feelings. Sometimes you only access one, and sometimes you only access the other. But it's not. This is a false dichotomy. You really need both, and you shouldn't try to suppress one or the other. The movement to ecosystem appears to focus on governance more than leadership. Yeah, that's a good one. What do we mean by governance, and what do we mean by leadership? I mean, I think we need to dig into what's the definition of governance here, and what's the definition of leadership, because otherwise we may be confused. But let's look at this definition of leadership, or these components or capabilities of leadership, and see if we find them valuable. So being aware, seeing with fresh eyes, trying to avoid labels and judgments, and try to really see things as they are, and avoid whatever glasses we may put on. Trying to integrate perspectives, opposite perspectives, complementary perspectives, many perspectives. That's something that Mary Parker Follett was very, very she mentioned that a lot, and I think she was a pioneer on that. Who gets a seat at the table? I think that's a very good question. I think it's really important that we get as many perspectives at the table, because then we will make better decisions. That's my experience. And we create a safe space, of course, so that people dare to say what they think, and so on and so forth. So this is what Kim Scott talks about as well, engineering leader, teacher of engineering leaders, both in Apple and in Google. Yeah, trusting and integrous. I mean, having integrity and trust people. I know this is different in different cultures and different countries, but I mean, assume that people will try to do good until proven otherwise. That's a good starting point. But I know it's different in different companies and different countries. Helpful, attending to folks' needs. I love this Bob Marshall antimatter principle, attending to folks' needs, including your own, and that goes back all the way to Lao Tzu, 500 BC. And again, purpose, super important. Co-create purpose and act accordingly, coming from the underlying capabilities here. That's the foundation for co-creating purpose. Harmonizing the whole, looking at the full picture, using the different perspectives, being aware. All the preceding capabilities will help you to harmonize the whole and look at the whole. Then, of course, flexibility. If things change and you've seen the whole picture, it will be easier to change, because you know your purpose. Collaboration, super important. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I love this African proverb. And cooperate, collaborate without pressure and control. Because if you have a purpose, you don't need it. And then trying really hard to create the conditions for self-organization. I mean, make it easy for people to do the right thing based on the purpose, with very few constraints in place. And this will lead to sort of realizing maximum outcomes with minimum efforts, and thereby sustainable success in turbulent times. And again, this is something to help you talk about leadership based on these patterns from the various models, including Meyer Parker Follett, Kim Scott, Lao Tzu, and these successful companies, the patterns, trying to find some kind of first principles for leadership, which may or may not exist. I mean, first principles in physics and math, that's one thing. I mean, natural sciences, you can argue that maybe there are no first principles in social sciences, and including leadership and strategy. But yeah, we can probably discuss that over a cup of coffee or a beer next time we meet in real life. So let's see, comments here. Who builds the map? Who participates? Yeah, in this case, and I think Chris and I and Mark could have a debate here when it comes to maturity mapping. I think in the maturity mapping, you would draw the map together. In this case, you could also draw the map together. But if you're the facilitator, it's good if you've done some homework and you have some ideas on what good looks like in the sense of some kind of principles for leadership. And you can even discuss, in this case, leadership principles or leadership capabilities, and see how they fit in your context. And you may or may not agree with these, and you may or may not have similar ones in your current setup. But I think this would help you to have some kind of direction to the discussion rather than starting from a white sheet of paper. Okay, let's see, what else do we have? Opening up space for negotiation. Yes, I've seen that. There's a fear of opening up for discussion. That's very true. So you need to have some kind of trust in the room to open up for debate and challenging in a friendly way. But hopefully a thing like a Wardley map can help you do that, because then you argue about the contents of the map rather than arguing against a leader or other leaders, and you sort of argue with their narrative or their storytelling, and it's about them versus you, or they he or she versus your debate. So if you can sort of build upon a map at the whiteboard, that creates a more collaborative space. That's what I've seen over the years. Evolutionary bio and game theory would suggest that there are first principles for leadership. Yeah, happy to continue that discussion and get some references. Thanks for sharing, Lee. I'm going to move on. Let's talk about development capabilities, and this is from a number of companies here: Spotify, Riot Games, the gaming company, obviously. NetEnt is an online gambling company, Microsoft, and Ericsson. And I was fortunate enough to be a member of something called the Steve Denning Learning Consortium, where these companies were members, except NetEnt, where I worked for a number of years. But in this learning consortium, we traveled around and we talked about these things, and we shared, the good and the bad and the ugly of how we were doing software development. And we could really do that after a while. We could be very open and frank, and we could talk not only about those success stories, but also what didn't work. So these are both positive patterns and anti-patterns. And I try to sort of summarize this again in one of these value chain maps. So customers, colleagues, owners, society, stakeholders. Again, sustainable success in turbulent times. And in this case, it's about software development. Two parts. We do the right things, which is sort of effectiveness, and we do things right, which is efficiency. And the pattern here is was that it starts from respect, not this kind of hierarchical respect, but more mutual respect of people for who they are. Then collaboration, super important in teams and between teams or across teams. In order to do the right things, it's important to know who your users are and what their needs are. And when it comes to doing things right, having short, fast feedback loops for learning and improvement is crucial. Vision, again, knowing what the next big thing is based on your user needs and your users, and those feedback loops for learning and improvements. That will help you to formulate what your next big thing is. When it comes to doing things right, quality is the foundation. If you have good quality, then you will go faster. That will help you with delivering more as well, but we'll come to that later. But this right-hand side of doing things right doesn't really matter unless you validate what you're doing so that it is reasonable or ethical from a societal perspective. It is viable from a business perspective, so you get your cash flow in and you have your business model right. Because same as for human beings, if we don't have any air, we will die, or oxygen, we will die, and the company without cash flow in will die as well. What I've seen is in terms of technology, we focus a lot on that, maybe over focus on that, and we tend to forget about the societal aspects and whether it's valuable and usable from a customer perspective. And I think it's really, really important to consider all these 5 illities, because if we forget about the ethical dimension, we may go horribly wrong, and we may end up in a dystopia, even worse than what Orwell and others wrote about. Yeah. Doing more, more throughput, but again, we may deliver more shit, pardon my French, if we don't get the left-hand side correct. And then we may be doing things right, efficiently, but we're not doing the right things, and we end up delivering what was totally unnecessary, and we waste our brain power and our energy in a terrible way. Yes. How about a few concrete examples right about now? Yes, I will do this rather quickly because, again, these are capabilities, and we can realize this with methods and practices and tools. And I will just show a few here when it comes to users and user needs. I mean, lean startup, design sprint, Google sprints, design thinking, jobs to be done, impact mapping. Those are brilliant methods and checklists and tools that you can use there. When it comes to vision and strategy, you have WardleyMapping, obviously. You have Playing to Win by Roger Martin, another great a method for strategy. You can use your objectives and key results, or you can use 4 disciplines of execution to make strategy happen. So there are different ways to skin a cat, obviously. Validating, again, lean startup, design sprints, impact mapping. Prioritization, you can use things like cost of delay in order to get your priorities right. You can use the business model canvas, another great tool or method for validation. Collaboration, cross-functional teams, end-to-end teams, handle dependencies. You can use various kind of anatomies to enable collaboration. Feedback loops, well, these are examples of feedback loops, right? Retrospectives, stand-ups, pair programming or ensemble programming. I don't like the term mob programming, but just to tell you what I mean, maybe ensemble or team programming is better words, and words matter. Code reviews, test-driven development, continuous integration, continuous delivery, DevOps, all these things are about feedback loops. Quality, again, a lot of things we already saw. You can use a lot of tools for you know, SonarQube to check your code quality or code complexity. You can use the scout rule, leave the code in better shape when you check it in when you checked it out. Yeah, I'm rushing through this, and you will have the slides, of course, and there will be references where you can click on the links if you're curious to know more about all these things. So just to, yeah, let's see, Philip. Yeah, I'm not a fan of canvases because they essentially organize the capture of what you know and end up as a way of organizing one's biases. Wardley maps offer serendipity. That's a very good point. It's a very good point. When you use a canvas, you are definitely constrained, and sometimes that could be in a good way. So, yeah, it really depends on the problem to be solved or the job to be done. Sometimes it's good to have a checklist so you don't forget things. Sometimes, maybe if you're in a more novel space, yeah. That's definitely deserves a coffee discussion or a beer discussion or even a gin tonic discussion, depending on your preferences. Cool. Moving on. Yeah, where do we start when you have such a value chain or dependency graph? Ask your customers, what do we do well? What should we improve? And then ask yourselves, what do we do well? What can we improve? And then you pick one thing, the most important thing right now. And in this case, it was the user needs and the users. And then you start digging where you are. You start walking from under your feet. You start where you are and get going, rather than handling the 10 other things that may not be so important at this point in time. And since this is a dependency graph, the further down you get to the bottom, the more important things you get. So it's good to start to get those things right, because if you don't respect each other or you cannot collaborate, it doesn't really matter if you have a number of the other things in place. You will have a house standing on sand, basically. Yes. We're at the end because I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A and the discussion. So just to summarize, you can use this value chain for visualizing and getting a good situational awareness of where you are when it comes to capabilities for strategy, leadership, and development. You will visualize these patterns, and potentially these are can be considered as first principles or at least principles, and see how they relate to each other. And these things would complement Wardley's doctrine and definitely complement Chris and Mark's maturity mapping from a slightly different angle, from a slightly different perspective. Because what I love with both with Chris and Mark's work is that that's very, very contextual, and you start with what the team needs and the organization needs in their context. And this will help you to assess your current needs and your future needs when it comes to capabilities for strategy, leadership, and software development, both internally and in relation to your competition. Let's see, Lee, yeah, canvases are helpful for communication to wider audiences as a standard format. As a format for ideation, brainstorming, they can be overly constraining, but helpful for certain basic audiences. Yeah, I mean, you can see it as scaffolding, right? It's or training wheels when you learn to bike, and then you can discuss metaphors if they're suitable or not. And yeah, I think it really depends. It's a classic consultant answer, right? It depends, but it really does depend on what kind of people, what kind of audience you're dealing with, and their preferences. You know, if you're discussing strategy with a number of seasoned executives, there might be certain tools and methods that are suitable, and if you're discussing with the development team what they need in order to fulfill their mission when it comes to developing a new online service, whatever that may be, you may use certain other methods. But sketching at the whiteboard is always a good thing, and that you can definitely do with Wardley maps and with maturity maps, of course. Yeah. Other questions or comments? And by all means, reflections and criticisms, or what did I miss? What would you like to change? What would you like to remove, even? Because this is work in progress. This is based on some patterns and some experiences, mine and others. But this is definitely evolving, and I know we have some practitioners in the session here that know about these things. So if you have, let's see, how fit the three first diagrams together? You mean leadership, strategy, and software development, Stefan? Is that your question? Just so I ask. Yeah. Well, maybe you don't need to fit them together. You could do that, but you could also see it as three different perspectives that an organization need to sort of do assessment of their capabilities. I mean, how do we do software development? How do we what are our leadership principles, and what are the strategy principles we operate from? And those could potentially be handled separately, I think, because otherwise you have too many dependencies, and you end up with a big table or a too big graph. So I would recommend to discuss these and work on these in separate sessions, potentially with similar people, but just to sort of limit the task a bit and get focus. So that's my gut feeling, at least. So what else do we have here? Is enterprise architecture becoming ineffective? I'm not the right person to answer that. I'm not an expert in enterprise architecture. I do need, I think, or my experience is we need architecture. We need people who think about architecture, and we need to think about architecture not only from a tech perspective but from a business perspective. And I think what I like with what I've seen with enterprise architecture is the visualization, and that can help you get discussions going, and you talk about what's on the paper rather than debating each other. So that is definitely a good thing. Yeah. Yeah. If you wanna, turn on your cameras and turn on your mics, we can discuss even better together. We don't need to be constrained by the chat. Hey, Philip.
Yes, I was wondering, and maybe I can show an example, because I was working on a couple of things, and to Suzanne's question as well. I come from a coaching background, and it's really difficult in change to get the leadership to recognize what do they need to change about themselves, around their practices, behaviors, and so on. And one thing I look to do is basically do a map about what's needed in terms of change of the system. And you tend to start with the customers, the users, and you work on what do we need to change and why. You do a map. And then below, you do a reverse map upwards to say, okay, where is the leadership plugging in? And what do they need to bring and so on to actually affect that? And how, and then you create a value chain of how and where it applies into your map, which I'm trying to test at the moment around how can we create the awareness of a coaching and a change agenda from the people concerned, saying, where are they actually playing into the system in terms of bringing the change? If I can, I don't know, can I share my screen here? Yes.
Of course. Just to comment on that, I fully agree with you, Philippe. I think that makes perfect sense to do it that way. And I think this is what I did here was to extract some patterns from such exercises that I've done over the years. I mean, I'm not formally a coach or a trained coach, but I've been a leader for many years in many positions, in even executive positions. So I know exactly how hard it can be, both being a leader and executive, and trying to make change to happen. And as Susan says, everyone is expected to be a leader, especially in knowledge work these days. And knowledge work, I don't like the term really. I think we're all curious, creative collaborators. And if we want to do things together as curious, creative collaborators, we really need to have the trust to make decisions and take action closer to the customers and closer to the needs. And that's why both in the leadership graph, the leadership value chain, and in the strategy value chain, I try to emphasize that specific part.
And everybody is supposed to bring some leadership. If you want autonomy, you need to bring some leadership. But not many people know what or how. And that is the challenge most of the time. And the awareness.
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. Adults, they take a lot of decisions, big decisions for their private lives. For if they have a family, or kids, or buying a house, or buying a car, or buying a pet. So, those are decisions in some sense are bigger than decisions you would take in the company setting. So I agree with you, yes, but I disagree with you in another sense.
I think we're agreeing. In the company, they're not bringing that to the table.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm trying to share. I don't know if you can see the share.
I'm just going to comment on Anit's comment. That's the goal of agility and requirement to be agile. Yeah, and if I think about it, I didn't use the word agile in any of the slides, and that's on purpose because agile can mean so much, and I try to explain what I mean by these things using other words rather than throwing an overloaded term that may mean different things to different people. Yeah, people aren't trained to negotiate, including leaders. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think many are trained in that. It's part of leadership training, at least when you reach a certain level.
The point about negotiating, though, is it implies a transaction. And in a way, sometimes, even if you call win-win, but sometimes you may be right and wrong. And I'm finding systemic leadership, meaning how do you bring the system together for the system to find an answer? And how you work with conflict sometimes to actually find better answers, more creative ones, is probably it's something that people are even less trained on. And many of the reasons for that is because most growth in enterprise tends to be through projects, through budgets, and people through that are actually building a leadership of managing tasks, not managing people. And yes, you have teams, you have people, and you feel like you're managing people, but essentially you're just managing and coordinating tasks that people do. And that's very different than managing a system, because you're not getting the creativity out of it. And very often you tend to divide and coordinate rather than bring the team together to collaborate. And all this is in Agile, of course, but not much in Agile gets into the finer sort of level of working in a systemic way to lead this.
Yeah, and I love this quote by Russell Aikoff. You know, the organization or the system is not the sum of its parts; it's the product of the interactions. So it's about the interactions. That's where the magic happens. Interactions between people, interactions between teams, and if you can sort of enable those interactions in a good way, then that's a good way of sort of trying to co-create a better organization or a better system. And to the point of Agile being Scrum, Kanban, Safe, I think Simon put it very well in the keynote. There are Agile methods, which is Scrum, Kanban, Safe, and so on and so forth. But then you have Agile as sort of the way of acting and using the right methods in the right context. You use Six Sigma, for instance, when it's commoditized, and you would use, you know, whatever design thinking in novel space. So I think that's important to distinguish between agility as sort of some kind of ways of thinking and ways of operating and agile methods. Just a comment to Michael's points.
The point you're making here is very important one. I believe, and I see quite often around, you know, when people talk about operating model, it always ends up with a RACI or RACI matrix. And you know, people don't see the irony of that we are defining what's involved in a role, and people then can say, oh, I did my job and somebody else hasn't. And the more important thing is to understand our roles are in relationship with each other towards outcomes, and recognizing that it doesn't matter what the exact thing is. You bring certain competencies to a collaboration to realize some outcomes. And we should really start in operating models looking at relationship first and roles in the relationship second, rather than jumping to a RACI to actually sort of constrain. Each role is there to do that, and what falls through the crack is actually some failures eventually. But if people are in relationships, they have to make up for whatever may fall through the cracks. They are here collaborating against an outcome, and not enough is said about that.
I think Susan brings up a very important point. There is leadership clinging to colonialism, imperialism. For me, in knowledge work or this endeavor where we're curious, creative collaborators, everyone is a leader, and everyone is contributing, and that's the kind of system or setup that I would like to create as a leader. When things work and leaders are not needed, that's sort of the ideal situation, where it's like a self-playing piano, to take a silly metaphor. Then you have managed to build a system together, which is hard, of course, and we may need elements of leadership from each and every one of us, depending on what is needed. So, but I think you may have you may see leadership based on historical baggage, and that can of course be bad or good. So totally get your point. Yeah, I don't know if the session is ending. I think there are other cool sessions coming up, and we're just 1 minute to the hour. So yeah, I'm happy to continue the conversation, on Twitter or elsewhere. I love talk about visualization, strategy, leadership, and software development. So let's continue the conversation and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.